Hariom friends, welcome to the fifth part of the series on the famines in Bharat or India, which were engineered by the British. So the fourth part was very well received. So thank you for that. And it's a very cold morning here in New Zealand. It's 4 degrees Celsius now. So I hope the weather is better, at the place where you are living right now. Okay, so let's crack on with the slides. Just give me a quick minute. I'll just switch. So the first question is, why were the farmers not able to tide over particularly bad famine years? So it's not like famines started under the British or were happening only under British rule. So famines were not a regular occurrence, but did happen every few decades, or a big famine came by every 100 years. But why was it only under the British that we had such massive mortality in a relatively short period of time? So there were massive famines under the Muslim rulers as well, but not with such high frequency. And why did a few years of particularly bad drought lead to Indian farmers dying in the millions? So these are some of the key questions we need to ask ourselves. And I'll be kind of explain that a little bit in this set of slides and in the next set of slides as well. Okay. So one of the first things we need to understand that the British taxed the farmers to death. Okay. And the case of Bengal is quite illuminating to know how the British bled Indians white, even when the farmers had nothing to eat. So the British attitude towards tax and revenue extraction remained virtually unchanged till they left India in 1947. And Bengal, unfortunately, was the first to feel the devastating effects of the Christian British rule after the East India Company became rulers of the province post the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Within decade, within 10 years, in 1768, a massive famine killed off nearly 10 million people in Bengal and Bihar, which was almost one third of the population. And if you look at the graph, which I have put on the screen, you will see that the revenue collected by the East India Company during the terrible famine of 1768 in millions of pounds, it actually went up during the famine years. If you look at 1767, 68, even 1766, 67, just leading up to the famine and during the peak of the famine and a couple of years after the famine, there wasn't much flexibility shown in the revenue. So it was extremely inflexible, and brutal methods were employed to collect revenue. So women were raped, people were tortured, beaten to death, and all of these kinds of things. So anything to make sure that the revenues stayed intact, even when one third of the province's population was dead due to famine. And this gentleman here is, some of you might recognize him. So this is Warren Hastings. He was the Governor General of Bengal, and after Clive, it was Hastings who really spread the British Empire in India. Who kind of He was a master political strategist, to put it bluntly. And Warren Hastings was the one who kind of made sure that revenue was extracted even when people are dying. So here's a quote from Hastings himself, so from the horse's mouth, to so to speak. So what he says is, notwithstanding the loss of at least one third of the inhabitants of the province and the consequent decrease of cultivation, obviously farmers were dead, the net collections of the year 1771 exceeded even those of 1768. It was naturally to be expected that the diminution of the revenue should have kept an equal pace with the other consequences of so great a calamity. So the revenue went down a bit. It didn't increase as was predicted, but it was more than 1768. That it did not was owing to its being violently kept up to its former standard. So a lot of violence and brutality was employed, as I mentioned before. And even while this dance of death was going on in Bengal, record amounts of tax were recovered from the people. And so this is the great Warren Hastings. So every Governor General or Viceroy of India was worse than any Nazi governor or any Nazi officer who kind of committed massive atrocities during the Second World War. And another problem was that the farmers were forced or incentivized to grow cash crops, because what happened was, to pay the horrendous land revenue or land tax demanded by the British, the farmers had to go grow crops which would give them a decent profit. And if you had your normal, edible crops like wheat, rice, or millets or pulses, you wouldn't get the kind of profit you needed to pay off the, British kind of hafta wasuli and survive as well. So cotton, indigo, opium, these were the cash crops of the day. They took priority as farmers looked to balance, their survival with bare profits. And in the mid 1800s, so 1850s, so you had British commercial bodies like the Manchester Chamber of Commerce, which could dictate and control the growth of these cash crops in different areas. For example, the MCC, or the Manchester Chamber of Commerce, controlled the growth of cotton in fertile areas with a lot of black soil, such as cotton. Now, the problem with these cash crops was they rendered the soil infertile. The seeds were expensive, and these were very resource intensive. So the farmers went into debt simply to grow these crops, forget about getting any profit when they were sold. And another consequence was these old landlord families, the old zamindars, not the British created zamindars, they were mostly destroyed, and the British government became the supreme owner of the farmlands, because they had this Rayatwari or Rayatwari system, which I have tackled in more detail in my Tirunelveli, revenue series, which I'll link at the end of the video. And a new class of zamindars was created, who were basically, parasites. Okay. And these are the zamindars who are kind of featured in movies such as Do Bigha Zameen and quite of the movies of the 1940s and 50s. And there was another thing. So cotton grew well in the Deccan's black soil, like I mentioned in Vidarbha, but you needed railways to make sure that the raw cotton could be transported quickly to the ports, which was Mumbai. So railways were kind of set up, and Vidarbha was positioned to serve as a buffer against fluctuations in North American supply, which became quite critical, especially during and after the US Civil War of the 1860s. And railways exposed the Vidarbha farmers to wild fluctuations in world prices, and they had absolutely no share in the massive profits made by the British bloodsuckers or leeches. And thus, when famine hit, the impoverished farmers died in their millions, not even their lakhs. And along with the zamindars, there was another class of leeches who kind of spread throughout India, and these were the Marwadis. So the farmers were heavily indebted to these sahukars, who were encouraged by the British to settle in towns and villages throughout India. And I'll give you the example of Maharashtra, where there were big riots in 1867 known as the Deccan Riots against Marwadi and Gujarati moneylenders who were exploiting the people to the bone in the villages. Now, what happened was land was now concentrated in a few wealthy non-resident landlords, and the farmer essentially became a laborer on his own land, so earning a very basic, meager pittance. And another consequence was acreage under ownership fell rapidly as British policy fragmented large farms, sorry for that, not farms, farms. And at the beginning of British rule, say for example in present day Andhra Pradesh, you had massive zamindaris, uh, which could be anywhere between 40,000 to 80,000 acres. Now, the British collectors, because they were greedy for money, they auctioned these zamindaris on the flimsiest excuse. So, if you were in arrears by say 50 rupees, 100 rupees in a year on paying the land revenue, your zamindari was auctioned, and then this was taken up by this new class of landlords. Now, who, because they had to pay the increased land revenue, uh, you know, got a lot of tenants to work on their farms, paid them very less, exploited them, brutalized them, and so on. Plus, because the Indian industry by 1850s was in a complete state of collapse, so there was a massive influx of out of work artisans, craftsmen, weavers, and These were forced to work as unskilled laborers with no resources to withstand a famine because they were simply not set up for farming. This was not their trade for thousands of years. If you understand the jati system of India, of Hindu society, you will understand. So this was kind of the guild system and hereditary occupation. So once they were suddenly thrown onto the fields to farm for their subsistence, obviously they had no chance of survival. So that's all for this time, friends. I hope you have liked this video. Please do remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next part. Hari Om.